From Social Prosperity Partners, this is Community Catalyst.
Welcome to a special episode of Community Catalyst, the podcast that examines the qualities of community leadership and the many paths and forms it can take. I'm your host, Matt Lehrman. We are recording live at the annual conference of the Arkansas Municipal League in beautiful Little Rock. And I want to start by expressing my heartfelt thanks to everyone here for the enthusiastic reception to my opening keynote. It's just inspiring to be around so many civic leaders dedicated to moving their communities from conflict to conversation. We are very fortunate to be able to welcome our guest today because we are recording this on Thursday, June 13th, and just 2.5 weeks ago, over Memorial Day weekend, his community, with a population of 73,000 people, was one of the hardest hit by a rash of tornadoes that impacted northwest Arkansas and extended to a massive region that involves cities and towns in Oklahoma, Texas, and Kentucky. We are glad he's safe and able to spare some time to be with us at the conference and to talk with us on the podcast. Please welcome the mayor of the city of Rogers, Arkansas, the Honorable Greg Hines.
Hey, thank you. It's great to be here with you this morning.
There's a roar from the crowd. Welcome, Mayor. It's good to see you, and thank you both for making time to be at the conference and also for being open to this conversation. Really glad to talk to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
So, look, I have to start with what happened a couple of weeks ago. It's cliche to say when an issue hits close to home, but here I understand it's perfectly precise because in the national reporting about the tornadoes in Rogers, the New York Times said that he had to make his way through the limbs of a 120-year-old maple tree that blocked his front door before he could take a helicopter tour of the damage. So first off, how are you? How's your community doing?
Yeah, our community is now kind of getting into that phase of recovery. The emergency's over and recovery's starting. And I've been through a few natural disasters in my 25 years of elective office. And while this is by far the worst that I've seen communities be resilient in these cases, and in this case there's no different. And in fact, while I was climbing under and over trees to try to get to one of our high school parking lots to get on the helicopter, there were folks out, neighbors out, cutting trees, trying to get roads open before city crews could get there.
Mayor, tell me, what was the experience like for you during the tornado itself? I assume you, your family, you were hunkered down?
Yeah, so we were home. I happened to be up once the first alarm went off and heard the sirens in the city go off. And so all of our bedrooms are upstairs, so we hustled everybody. My daughter was home from college, and we got downstairs, and I went and opened the patio door that looks out over the pool, and leaves were just flying in. It was more hurricane type feeling than it was a tornado or a big storm. And fortunately, when we built our house, we built a safe room. Our pantry is a fortified concrete safe room. So we all huddled in there with the dogs and listened until we couldn't hear anything.
And what's it like to be the mayor while you're huddling down here? Are you in radio contact with folks? What's that experience like?
Yeah, so that's interesting that you asked that question because it's a feeling I get anytime we have severe weather in the forecast or a warning issued. And it's kind of a surreal feeling because you have a family that you're responsible to first, but then I've got a family of 73,000 that I'm responsible for that are looking for me to act and react in order to help them. And so, like I said, fortunately, I've been doing this a while, and so that somewhat comes natural, but you can't ever discredit the idea of that feeling of having to leave your family. I mean, I didn't see my family for, nearly 3 days after the event because I was out working and getting very, very little sleep. And so, while other homes were trying to deal with the damage and the destruction, I just sort of left my folks there to sort of fend for themselves, and somewhat of an interesting feeling.
Mayor, you've been in office since 2011, I understand, right?
Yes, that's correct. I've been mayor since 2011, but 12 years before that, I served on the city council.
So what I really wonder is, it's just a couple of months ago that the ship hit the bridge outside of Baltimore. And recently I interviewed the mayor of Tacoma, Washington, also a big port city. And I asked her this question, same question I want to ask you. How do you get trained or prepared to get that phone call or to get that warning that says a disaster is about to happen or has just happened in your community? How do you get trained as mayor to know what your job is in that moment?
Well, that's an interesting question too, and there's no courses in college, there's no degree path to help you get there. And early in my career, I became a city council member at 22, and within the first year or so, I knew what my ultimate goal was. And so, unlike Cousin Eddie, I wasn't going to hold out for the CEO position. So I thought, what can I do to get involved to prepare myself when the time is right? And so I became a full-time law enforcement officer, and I spent 10 years in law enforcement. And so I think that career path really helped me prepare to know, one, what focus do you need to have, and who do you need to listen to, and who do you need to drown out in the immediate emergency situation. And so I look at that decade of experience, and then 2 years as the director of public safety for Benton County, dealing, with the '09 ice storm, and I think those things are the things that prepared me. And so I can tell you this, that when I came into office in 2011, we had the worst snowstorm in my lifetime, and I've been in Rogers my entire life. We had the worst drought the next year. We had the worst flooding 3 years later. We had a tornado in 2019. And so I've dealt with FEMA, I've dealt with these types of disasters, and in this instance, though it being the worst, I never felt more confident in knowing what steps to take.
You have a strong mayor form of government in Rogers, right? So you are not just the arbiter of the city council, the administration of the city is under your responsibility as well.
That's correct.
To talk about what is the scope of that responsibility.
Yeah, so it's a lot of folks think of a mayor, especially that moved to Northwest Arkansas from all over the globe, and various governments exist around the country, and we happen to be a strong mayor council form of government. So I'm not the ceremonial Hallmark movie image of a mayor that's kissing babies and working a rope line. I do those things, but I really got into this line of work. I'm more of a policy wonk. I'm a budget hawk, when I came into office, our reserve, our general fund reserve, was about $15 million, and today we're somewhere around 70. Now we may tap into a little bit of that after this event, but those are the things that really drove me to get into this line of work, and I think it would be remiss to not point out that having spent that time in law enforcement, nobody gets to see their community like a street cop. I mean, you're in people's living rooms, whether it be a trailer house or a mansion at the private country club. And what I realized was that all the problems that we were dealing with are all the same. They're not socioeconomic based, they're not race based, or any other such thing. They're just problems that people have. And so, I think that recognizing that our community is way more alike than it is different in so many ways helps you sort of put things into perspective as you're having conversations and dealing with different challenges.
I'm going to ask you more about those different challenges in a minute, but I want to stay just in the crisis management mode for a moment. I can imagine that the police chief, the fire chief, the emergency services people, they have binders and clipboards and all kinds of protocols in place for worst case scenarios and disasters of every kind. What does the mayor have?
That's a really good question, one that you didn't front me, by the way. So what the mayor has to have, regardless of whether you have fear at the moment in your heart or whether you have uncertainty, you can't show that. You have to put on a face, you have to be the adult in the room, so to speak. And so many times I think in today's climate in our world, we're searching for the adult in the room because it seems like everybody's screaming. And so to me, it's being that calm, stalwart, I'll make a decision, and if it's wrong, we'll back up and start digging a new hole. But you can't be afraid to act and make a decision. And you just have to have the faith and rely on your life experiences and some technical training from FEMA and ADAM and other agencies. There's certainly best practices in disasters, but you really just have to trust your gut.
I want to ask you this in another way, because when I asked the same question of Mayor Victoria Woodards, who happens to be the past president of the National League of Cities, the mayor of Tacoma, Washington, she's not a strong mayor form of government, so she's more, if you will, ceremonial in that sense. But her answer to that question was that it was the mayor's responsibility to be the adult in the room, to be thinking about not the mechanics of the process, but caring for the people, asking the question, are the first responders safe? Are the people being attended to? That the mayor's job is to be the human in the moment, not the tactician in response. Does that resonate for you as well?
Yeah, I think it does. I think, but certainly, again, you're having to pull from your own life experiences. And so because I have a background that would be that tactician in some ways, I'm sort of leading with both. I would add one more thing, that her comments are very poignant. I'm being very candid with you about mine. I think another important step is that you've got to be the person that's actually thinking 3 and 4 steps down the road. It's easy to look right in front of your face and see the calamity and the emergency and the disaster of it all. But what's 48 hours from now look like? And what is your goal? What do you want 48 hours to look like? And I think that's one of the reasons why it was so important to go up in the helicopter and see our community from above to get a real sense of what had happened. And I can tell you that having done that and then having gone on the ground later that afternoon, there's no way I would have had the appropriate understanding of exactly what devastation had occurred.
So when you were up in the helicopter, what would you have answered then is what 48 hours from now should look like?
I think I was so shocked. In fact, the pilot kept having to tell me to take pictures. I mean, I had my phone and I'm taking pictures, but I was so awestruck at the destruction and at the visual view of the storm path that included a tornado, but also included a very wide swath on either side of the tornado disaster of just straight line winds where everything was broken off in the same direction versus the center path where it's all twisted. And then we flew around about 2/3 through the view, went through an area called Northwest Park, which is a $15.5 million park that we had just completed a month and a half ago, our baseball facility, and it was completely destroyed. And that as crazy as this may sound, that's when my heart sunk, because I've been dealing with baseball dads and moms and kids for years, dreaming of this facility being available in our community, and watched kids play on it for a month and a half, and now it's gone.
Leveled. I have a couple more questions just on this, then we'll move on to something else. In the immediate aftermath of a disaster, from your position as mayor, does the wider community, does the state, do the feds, do they just show up and bring resources to your aid? Or, as mayor, is it your job to pull those resources in? I'm just trying to get a sense of, how much is necessary for the quality of leadership that you have locally to make emergency response happen at a grand scale.
Yeah, well, in some communities, I'm sure it takes a phone call to get those resources. In Northwest Arkansas, we're blessed that that's not the case. So the governor was on the ground Sunday night, and we were doing private briefings and then held a press conference. So kudos to our governor for showing up that quick. She was out of state on a family vacation. So that speaks a lot, speaks volumes for what Arkansans are willing to do and recognize when those of us, our neighbors, are in need. And so I didn't have to make any of those calls. Those resources were already on the ground that evening after the storm, and the process started at that point.
Tell me something you've learned about your community since the events of 2.5 weeks ago.
Well, I think it's restored my waning faith in humanity. Having been a mayor that went through COVID, I can tell you that that out of my 25-year public elected career, I've never been more challenged to find the faith in our community and in the people around us. And so, I think just the outpouring of support, seeing neighbors that haven't spoken because of political divides or religious divides or whatever, what have you, ball teams that they don't like, coming together and just helping one another. What it made me step back and pause and think was, this is what makes our country great. This is what all of the dividers around the world don't get about the United States. They can keep our sphere plagued with all of this nonsense and keep us all stirred up and angry about certain things. But when a disaster happens, they can't keep us apart. And that's the part that drives them crazy.
Anything else about the tornado experience I should ask you about before we move on?
Well, other than that, I think this is an important point that I would like my colleagues, anyone listening to this, to understand. So having been through some of this before and dealing with FEMA and the process, which is, it's one of the best federal government agencies we have. I don't want to call them out for that. But there's not a lot of certainty when you ask a question. It's always, well, that might be okay. And so you're kind of left to make your own decisions, and then on the back end try to argue your point to get your, to get refunded for any money that you expend. So I didn't wait for the president to sign an emergency declaration. I didn't wait for FEMA to get on the ground. We hired debris contractors. We hired monitors. We hired a monitor to monitor the monitors, and because of that reserve, we're in a position to be able to do that and say, hey, you know what? If we don't get refunded on the back end, that's okay, because this community has got to get to the healing point. And so as a result of that, we had people on the ground picking up debris, 72 hours after the event, 50 trucks on the ground. So, we had already at the end of last week picked up over 100,000 cubic yards of vegetative debris. In a community that waited on the declaration is 3 weeks out from having help. So I would just encourage mayors to trust your gut, take the resources you have, put them into action before the declaration, and get your community healing. And I think that's made all the difference in the world for our people.
I'm curious, when you say that you spoke to FEMA and you asked a question, their response was, well, that might be possible. Does that give you power and discretion to then do things that you think are important? Or did you see that as a hindrance or in impeding of being able to take action?
I take it as just an understanding of what their role is. They have a set of guidelines and rules, but they're human too. And no circumstance is the same as the last one or will be the next one. And so they're basically trying to shepherd you through a process to get reimbursed for any dollars you spend in disaster recovery, but there's no definite answer at the moment. And that's frustrating for folks first time going through a process like this, because we want definitive answers, right? Uncertainty is what I try to take out of the equation in most of what I do. And so I think just understanding the process and then saying, okay, they've got a job to do, and this is a 2-year process. I mean, we'll be dealing with FEMA for 2 to 3 years from now. We got to get recovering today. And so action, leadership calls for action, and I think that's just, you've got to have that sense of just knowing that things are going to work out, and if they don't, guess what? You still got your city recovering faster, and your folks deserve it, and we'll make up the resources later.
So God forbid this ever happens again. Is that the big takeaway here as an administrator, that these resources exist, jump right in, do the work necessary, get the response going, trust that the funding of that will fall into place, but nothing should get in the way of the response itself?
Absolutely. You have to have some faith in the process.
I'm going to move our conversation on. Mayor, as you know, the purpose of this podcast is to invite leaders to open up about the hard-earned lessons they've picked up on their journey to leadership, and to be willing to discuss the good, the bad, and even the ugly. So as we prepared for our discussion, you suggested that I ask you about the toxic leadership environment that existed when you first took office back in 2011. What was that about?
Yeah, so there's all kinds of leadership styles, and I'm not, I'm not the expert. I have a style of my own, and I think it works. But someone else may have a lot of critiquing to do about my leadership style. But all that for naught. The former mayor, who's now a congressman, was in the Guard and was a colonel, and he ran the organization very, very military-like. And so as a result of that, we had the majority of our department heads that really had sort of developed this idea that they're not going to act or suggest until they hear what the mayor says. And I'm totally the opposite of that. I want to hire smarter people than I am in the field that we're hiring them in, and then I want them to tell me what they think they need to do. And then we'll concur or not and move on. And so we were just analysis paralysis, and so I was navigating through that and found one very toxic situation in our CFO at the time that was just basically running roughshod over the entire city departments. And it, that's tough when it's your CFO. It's one of the most important positions you have. I mean, I think outside of your senior staff attorney, the bean counter, that's an important role. And so dealing with that and trying to untangle that was probably the hardest thing I've done in my working life.
So you come into office. Again, your office is an administrative. How many employees do you have?
About 554, I think, today.
554 employees for the city. And you've got a senior manager whose approach to the job is inconsistent with your leadership style. What is your leadership style?
My leadership style is that I like to lead folks the way I like to be led when I was an employee, which is hire me into the spot, have confidence in me, tell me what the expectations are, and let me go do my job. And I promise you something. If I mess up, you'll be the first to know. But I can't stand to have people looking over my shoulder all the time. And so I hire very independent thinkers and independent people that are talented and proven in the role that they're in, and it's their department to lead. I'm here to help solve problems. That's how I see my role, is to be an advisor and to help solve problems, because no matter how smart you are, you're going to get yourself in a pickle. But because I've spent all these years in the community and in elective office, I can navigate a lot of challenges. And I can solve a lot of problems, and I can make some things, go away. And so that's my style. So if you're looking for an attaboy, or as my old coach used to say, if you're the kind of guy that needs a back rub, you might want to get on another team.
I want to talk to you about the virtue of compromise in municipal government. Now, on your city council, remind me, you've got, 8 council members from 4 wards, right? So 2 council members per ward. Do you vote on your city council?
Only in the case of a tie.
And so what's your function in terms of trying to bring your council members together on matters of public policy?
So we do things just a little bit different in Rogers. It might surprise you but our city council meetings are twice a month on the second and fourth Tuesday of each month. Start at 6:30 p.m. Usually 5:30 are committee meetings prior to. The invocation might be the longest point of our council meetings. If we're there past 30 minutes or so and there's not a room full of people for some contentious rezone, something's gone terribly wrong. We're generally out of there by 7:15. You can contrast that to some other communities around us that start at 6:30 or 7, and they might still be there at 11 o'clock at night. And so I think what's most important is having served on the city council for 12 years in that role and understanding how you feel as a council person and what that means and how you perceive your role. I'm very respectful of each of those 8 individuals and respectful of the committees that they chair, the committees that they serve on, and our committee system is so strong that if the Finance Committee comes out with a recommended do pass on something, you won't hear a lot of banter from anybody else on the council. There's a lot of trust among those 8 peoples about their committee system. And that's why I think that we're able to have 30-minute council meetings versus hours long.
When you say there's a lot of trust, does that mean there's a lot of deference, that council members just rely on each other for their areas of expertise, or is there actually so much participation in other committees and other forums that the work of forging agreement is actually happening in other places, so that by the time it gets to the council meeting, it's already been figured out?
Yeah, it's both. It is both. We have some council members that really want to be involved in kind of all sectors, regardless of their committee assignments. And the way I try to foster that along is figure out who those people are in the first few months they're in office and sort of encourage them. If you want to be that type of involved council member, we totally want to embrace that, but you need to do that during the week, not at a council meeting. The time to ask your questions of a department head is not when the mic's hot. Go visit with them in their office. And if you still have issues, or if there's something that deserves public debate, certainly feel free to bring it up. But please try to vet those things prior to the council meeting. And so that's a secret to the sauce, honestly.
That's a pretty significant secret. There are a lot of communities that wish that they could operate so efficiently.
And I think, it's funny, when we get folks, you've got these exhibitors sitting around in this room that are all professionals that support communities of Arkansas, and many of them will come to our community for the first time, want a bid or whatnot, and they'll come to a council meeting, and when it's over, they're just sitting around mesmerized that the room is cleared out, and we're turning the lights off and saying the doors are going to be locked, and you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. And it is refreshing to hear from folks that are not in our area saying, hey, this is unique. I've never experienced a council meeting that ran quite this efficiently.
So, Mayor, again, I've said it several times, but I keep repeating, our function here is to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. There is an adage that says that any strength taken to an extreme can become a weakness. Is there ever a time that you've had where the efficiency of this, the lack of time spent at a council meeting discussing something has actually bit you, where a decision was made or people were unhappy because they didn't feel there was the transparency necessary? Is there anything that you've actually learned over time that you know when to make sure to bring something to the public view?
Yeah, I think so, and I think most recently we had a situation like that come up where we were coordinating with another city to do a simultaneous de-annexation and annexation, so swapping land with another incorporated city, which just doesn't happen in Arkansas. And it was to redefine some boundaries and some service areas. And so there's a neighborhood in that area that is affected that will become a part of another city, and the residents are upset about that, and if I lived there, I probably would be too. And I kind of look back and think, well, if we'd have spent a little more time trying to bring them along, would it have helped? And the answer now, 4.5 months into the process, is probably not. Because there's a saying that I love it's a Mike Duke, former CEO of Walmart, that said, just because you're passionate about something does not make you right. And what you often find in dealing with community issues is that it's about people, they're at the council meeting because they're upset about something that affects them directly. They're not there to share or opine on their expertise in an area. They'd rather be at home or at soccer practice or watching TV. They've come to the council meeting because something's affecting them emotionally. And you have to try to separate that emotion. And that's the thing I'm the most proud of our council about, is that you can go to a council meeting anywhere in America, town of 70,000, town of 250,000, and if there's a room of 12 screaming people, it's pretty quick a council loses their edge. Because none of us like to have people angry at us. We certainly don't like to have people speaking to us in certain tones. And so it's easy to sort of get that feeling that maybe the whole community is right here in front of me. It may be these 12 people, but what if it's not? Well, if it was, the room would be full. And so because of that, we may have some 7-1 votes, may even get to a 6-2 vote, but by far, most of our votes are 8-0.
I'm going to give you a chance to push back on something that I kind of asserted in my keynote yesterday. I make the assumption that Maya Angelou was right when she said that people will forget what you said, they'll forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. So my application of that into municipal government is when people are angry, when they're passionate about something, that if you can make them feel connected, respected, and heard, that's the feeling that they will leave with. And even if they don't win the day for their position, that they will leave feeling satisfied that at least they got respected, that they had a position here. Is that your experience?
Yeah, totally. I think you're absolutely right on that, and we don't accomplish it every time, I can assure you, though that is the goal. But in this case I told you about the neighborhood affected in this rezone, or this annexation, very angry, highly volatile. But more of them than not said at the end of their address during the public forum of the council, I appreciate you hearing me. I may not agree with the position you're taking right now, and I hope that you change your position before the final vote, but thank you for listening to me. And so I think, life's really a lot easier than we try to make it. Just treat people with dignity and respect and try to do the right thing at the right time in the right way, and most things will work out if those are your kind of guiding stars.
The golden rule.
The golden rule.
Have you learned any particular skills that have been useful for you for handling situations where compromise seems impossible?
Well, yes, and you're not going to like my answer. I think so. Oftentimes I'm trying to fight back this, my quick Irish temper. So I can flare up pretty fast, but the good news is that it flames out quick too, and I come back to, we got to solve a problem here. And coming from an angry position or an adversarial position very rarely solves the problem at hand. And so, I've had to work on those skills to make sure and keep a poker face and try to find ways to connect to those people who are adversarial or disagree with you and find common ground. And usually what I do to accomplish that is I back up and I got my real estate license when I was a freshman in college and started selling real estate on the side. And if you're going to sell real estate and make any money at it, you figure out real quick that it's not about showing them the house that's their dream home. It's about connecting with them and connecting on a level that they feel comfortable and can trust you. And so that's the approach. I'm going to lean right back into your kids, your career. What are your dreams for your retirement? Where do you see yourself in 10 years? Try to boil it back down to how does it affect you? And that's the only thing that matters in the room at the moment.
It sounds like what you're saying is you're trying to help them to look through a lens that is further out than the immediate future.
Exactly.
How far into the future?
So far enough into the future to close the deal. That's the real answer. But that's different for everybody. And that's part of the secret to it, is trying to figure out that right spot to get to and then stop and don't go any further.
In a different talk that I give, one of the comments that I make when we talk about strategic planning, or the idea of it, is that in the future, all walls are low, right? That in the future, we can accomplish everything that we want. It's just a question of how far into the future are we willing to look. And if we can get people focused on the same goal in the future, then we can avoid the conflict for right now.
I think it's absolutely right, and we have a kind of a nice example of that in the way that we do our planning for the future in Rogers. We have a strong partnership with our Chamber of Commerce, and they lead a visioning process. This process started some 40 years ago. In fact, when I was in high school, a senior in high school, they were going through a visioning process and allowed for 2 high school seniors to be on the committee. And I got to be one of those 2 students to help lead and plan for the future of our community. And I draw back to that to just a few years ago, we were going through another planning phase, and they had always attached a year to it and said planning for 2028, planning for 2045. And we're going to reach a 100,000 population. The region's going to reach a massive number in a few years. We got 28 net new people a day moving into the region. And so I went to our chamber president and said, you know what, how about this? Instead of saying Vision 2040, let's call it Vision 100K. And the reason that I wanted to do that is that when you tell me Vision 2040, what does that mean to you? I immediately look at how old will I be, how old will my children be, how close to retirement will I be, where in life, what will I have accomplished by then? I don't think about my city. But when you say Rogers Vision 100K, you think, holy cow, traffic's already bad and we've only got 73,000. We're going to have 100,000 in just a few years. What do we have to do to plan for that? My gosh, I can't hardly get to work on time as it is now. What roads will have to be built? The parks are already jam-packed with teams. We don't even have practice facilities. What are we going to do to plan for that? It puts people in a different frame of mind to decide it's about the community and not about you individually.
I think that's a brilliant insight there. And I am going to go ahead and ask you my final series of questions. Mayor, these are lightning round questions. I'm going to ask you for quick off the top of your head answers. I haven't prepped you with any of these in advance. I'm going to cover a whole bunch of different topics. Are you ready for that?
Sure.
Here we go. Mayor Greg Hines, how would you describe your leadership style in just 3 words?
Very open, communicative.
What's the most impactful leadership advice you've ever received?
In the absence of eloquence, be brief.
If you could unilaterally enact one policy change at the city today, what would it be and why?
Honestly, I'd probably dissolve our Civil Service Commission. I believe that it existed at a point in time that was relevant, but in this day and age, we're not able to be as nimble as we need to be in the hiring practices of folks in our public safety arena. It limits us from hiring talent from outside the area or outside the state, and so I think that'd be the first thing I'd change.
Mayor, if you were going to send a message back in time to yourself to 2010, that is just before you were sworn into office as mayor, what would your message say?
My message to that 34-year-old would be try to check that temper and think twice before you speak or send an email.
Mayor, if you could instantly gain one new skill or talent, what would it be?
A better ability to just connect in a group setting with an audience, to bring everybody along. The hardest group to speak to is a group of cops because we're pessimists by nature. And so I always gauge my ability to communicate when I go annually to the meeting at the police department, and I gauge the looks on the eyes of all these folks out in the audience that are kind of think I'm full of BS to begin with, and I'm just a politician. So I feel a good day is when I can connect with over half the audience.
Mayor Greg Hines, what's one place a first-time visitor to Rogers, Arkansas should be sure to experience?
The Daisy BB Gun Museum.
Oh, tell me about that.
So Rogers really became on the map in 1957 when a company called Daisy BB Gun out of Plymouth, Michigan announced that they were moving their entire manufacturing facility to Rogers, Arkansas. And so the Christmas Story,
You'll shoot
your eye out, kid.
You shoot your eye out.
That's all home to Rogers. And we have, fortunately, we have the museum for that iconic American corporation. That still exists today, but it's owned by a larger conglomerate. And so you'll see, the most interesting thing that I think I see when I go in there is I'm always mesmerized at looking at this Daisy golf ball. And it's not obviously the ball that was used, but it's the ball that was hit on the moon.
That's fascinating. Mayor, what's a myth about leadership that you wish people would stop believing?
That the CEO, the senior elected leader, is fully in charge of every decision and every action taken upon the organization, because you're not.
Mayor, how do you recharge yourself, especially during challenging times?
So I require just solace alone time. And fortunately, my wife of 28 years next week has the same. And so we're empty nesters now, and generally, if it's a standard work day, we'll come home and cook dinner together, and then we actually sit down at the dining room table and we play games. I mean, like Yahtzee and backgammon. But at 9 o'clock, even if we're not watching our watches, at 9 o'clock, something happens and we both sort of trigger and say, yeah, it's time for us to go to our corners and get just a couple of hours of alone, quiet time where I don't have to answer to anybody. I can watch something stupid on TV that requires absolutely no thought or emotion, and that's how I recharge.
Mayor, last question for you. What gives you hope for the future?
Our youth. I'm always amazed when I visit with a group of intentional high school students and talk about higher-minded things than what they're doing in their college or in their high school career. And I learned something from the millennials. We were hard on millennials. I mean, desperately hard. In fact, I had to tell a lot of department heads, guys, you can complain all you want to, but this is not an anomaly. It's a new norm. So you can get on board with it or put in early retirement papers, but you're going to have to do one or the other. And so I learned something from millennials, and it kind of dovetailed into COVID, which is, they want to do their job in the most quick and efficient manner possible, and they want to get on to living life, because so much more about who we are and what we are and what makes us who we are is not defined by our professional careers. And if it is, it really shouldn't be. I'm a mayor, and it's a big job, and I love the job, but it's not what defines me. I'm a father and a husband, a friend, a church member, a son. Those things are much more important to me than this job. And I think that's what allows me to make this job seem easy to me, because it's just about doing the right thing.
Mayor Greg Hines, thank you for your openness. Thank you for taking the time to have this conversation. Best wishes to you. Best wishes to your community as well. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you so much, Matt. I appreciate it.
Once again, my thanks to Mayor Greg Hines of Rogers, Arkansas. This episode was specially produced in association with the Arkansas Municipal League, with special thanks to Kerry Locke and Ben Klein. It was edited by Nick Living the Dream Tantillo. Jenna Maisel is our production assistant. Our executive producer is John Little. I'm Matt Lehrman of Social Prosperity Partners. If you have a question, a comment, a story to share, reach me at 602-688-2724 or podcast at socialprosperity.us. I'd love to hear from you. We'll be back soon with another Community Catalyst.